Well, just a short time ago, the Senate voted on a historic measure to end American support of Saudi Arabian-backed forces in the Yemeni civil war. It's actually the first time the Senate has ever voted to end funding for a war. The measure passed with votes from members of both parties, in part as a reaction to the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi of Saudi Arabia. It's largely symbolic at this point. The House already voted not to take up the issue as part of a farm bill yesterday, and it could still reach the president's desk next year. The move comes after the United Nations bartered a deal earlier today for a ceasefire in the port city of Hodeidah. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke about the impact that this will have.
This will facilitate humanitarian access and the flow of goods to the civilian population, and it will improve the living conditions for millions of Yemenis.
Sheba Crocker is the Vice President of Humanitarian Policy and Practice at CARE USA. She joins me now from Washington. So, Sheba, we know this was largely symbolic. What impact do you think this might have with pulling funding from Saudi Arabia and improving the humanitarian condition in Yemen?
Well, I think the Senate vote itself is, as you say, largely symbolic, but nonetheless sends a really important signal, both, I think, to the U.S. administration, to the Trump administration, and also more broadly to the world and to the interested parties about where the U.S. stands at this point in terms of its continued military support to the Saudi-led coalition. And it's part of a drumbeat of enhanced diplomatic activity, real pressure coming from the press continuing to report, from NGOs sounding the alarm, and from the UN sounding the alarm about the state of the humanitarian crisis. And I think coming as it does today on the heels of the ceasefire agreement brokered by the UN in Sweden is just another really important notch in what is hopefully now the start of toward peace in that country.
So as we heard, we know the UN helped broker this deal to end the fighting in Hodeidah. How important is the ceasefire in the city to help the people of Yemen at this point?
It's really critical. I mean, obviously, all will depend now on whether the agreement is implemented, whether the parties stick to what they've said they're going to do. But Hodeidah and the port in particular is the critical access point for humanitarian aid coming into the city, and in fact, for all goods. Coming into the country, rather, and for all goods really coming into the country. It's been under siege for months, and so the fact that they were able, after this week of talks, to get to a ceasefire agreement, which they're reporting will start to be implemented immediately with troops from both sides pulling back, is really critical. The UN has said that up to 16 million people are in deep food insecurity in that country, with hundreds of thousands facing famine-like conditions. And with winter upon us now, it was just absolutely critical that we get some sort of a ceasefire and stop the conflict, hopefully, to enable things like humanitarian assistance to flow more easily, and to enable goods and services to get out to people, and hopefully also to start dealing with some of the economic challenges in the country, which have just been compounding the conditions under which people don't have enough to eat, can't afford what they need to eat, can't afford medical services, can't afford fuel and other basic goods and services.
I mean, one of the worst humanitarian crises we've ever seen right there in Yemen. Have we reached the point, though, where sending aid alone is not enough to really make a difference in this crisis?
I mean, for sure, we have to get to a political resolution and stop the conflict in this country. Aid alone is not going to save the tens of millions of Yemenis who are in need of humanitarian assistance. It's critically important. It has been saving lives, and CARE has been, a deep part of that, along with a number of other international NGOs and the UN on the ground, and Yemenis themselves doing what they can to survive in these conditions. But ultimately, unless there is a political resolution that ends the conflict, humanitarian assistance alone can't save the numbers of Yemenis that we're seeing that are just in such dire need across the country.
And our understanding is that these peace talks will resume next month. Are you hopeful? Do you think that there can really be an end to this war in sight?
It's a very, very important first step. I mean, I think all of us who have been watching this so closely were actually surprised that they were able to come to the agreement that they did today. And I think that's really to the credit of the UN Special Envoy, the UN Secretary General Guterres, who we heard from earlier, who flew in, and a number of other diplomats from Sweden and elsewhere who were on hand to try to broker this agreement. And if implemented, it really could prove the start of the end of this crisis. But it all comes down to that phrase, if implemented. And I think that's what remains to be seen, and obviously is hard to predict. I mean, I think the parties seem to have come into this round of talks with the right mindset, and with the mindset that they were going to actually reach agreement, which they did. And as you say, they'll now come together almost for what is the more difficult part, which is the longer-term political negotiations, which will resume at the end of next month, as I understand it.
Sheba Crocker. Sheba, thank you very much.
Thank you.